Have you ever watched someone get laughed at simply because people assumed they didn't belong in the room? Sometimes the world places quiet labels on people without even realizing it. The suit must be important. The uniform must mean something less. And the truth hiding behind those assumptions often goes unnoticed. But every once in a while, someone unexpected steps forward and reminds everyone just how wrong those assumptions can be. This is one of those stories, and it begins with a woman most people barely noticed. Her name was Rebecca Lawson. Rebecca was 34 years old and worked the evening shift as a janitor in a large financial firm in downtown Boston called Caldwell and Pierce Holdings. If you walk through the office around 8 p.m., you might see her quietly moving through the rows of empty desks, pushing a gray cleaning cart, headphones tucked into her ears as she wiped glass walls and polished conference tables. Most employees knew her only as the cleaning lady. Rebecca rarely spoke unless someone greeted her first. She had a calm, gentle personality, the kind of person who moved through the world quietly without drawing attention to herself. But her quietness didn't come from shyness. It came from years of learning that sometimes people simply didn't care to listen. Rebecca lived alone in a small one-bedroom apartment about 40 minutes outside the city. Her life was simple: work at night, groceries on the weekend, and long evenings at home with a small upright piano that took up nearly half her living room. The piano had once belonged to her father. When Rebecca was a child, her father had been a passionate amateur musician who believed music was more than just sound. To him, it was a language, something that could express emotions words never could. He started teaching Rebecca when she was 6. Every evening after dinner, they would sit together at the piano. Sometimes they practiced scales for hours. Other times they played simple pieces together, laughing whenever Rebecca missed a note. By the time she reached high school, Rebecca had become remarkably skilled. Our music teacher once told her she had the kind of musical sensitivity that couldn't really be taught. But life has a way of interrupting dreams. When Rebecca was 19, her father passed away unexpectedly after a sudden illness. Medical bills piled up quickly, and her mother struggled to keep the family afloat. College plans disappeared. Music school became impossible. Rebecca found a job instead. One job turned into another, and eventually she landed a position cleaning offices in Boston. The pay wasn't glamorous, but it was steady, and steady was enough. Years passed. The piano remained part of her life, but only quietly, privately, like a memory she visited when the world grew too heavy. At Caldwell and Pierce, the employees rarely noticed her. Executives rushed past with coffee cups and laptops. Analysts worked late into the night preparing presentations. Meetings came and went. Rebecca simply cleaned around them. The only person who occasionally spoke to her was an older security guard named Frank Doyle, who had worked in the building for nearly 20 years. Frank liked Rebecca. He once told her she reminded him of his daughter, hardworking, polite, and always thoughtful. Sometimes, when the floors were empty, Frank would sit at the security desk while Rebecca cleaned nearby, and they'd talk about ordinary things, weather, family, old movies. But no one else paid much attention, especially not the company's CEO. His name was Jonathan Caldwell. Jonathan Caldwell was 41, sharply dressed, confident, and known throughout the company as a brilliant businessman. He had inherited part of the firm from his father, but had expanded it into something far larger than anyone expected. He was charismatic, quick-witted, and comfortable being the center of attention. But like many successful people, he had also grown used to judging the world quickly. One evening in late November, the company hosted a formal networking event in the building's executive lounge on the top floor. Investors, partners, and employees gathered in suits and elegant dresses. Soft jazz played through the speakers, and waiters moved through the room, offering drinks and appetizers. In one corner of the lounge stood a polished, black, grand piano. It was mostly decorative. Occasionally someone would sit down and play a few casual notes, but it wasn't meant for serious performances. Rebecca had been asked to clean the lounge Once the event started winding down, around 10 p.m., she quietly entered the room with her cart, trying to stay out of the way while guests continued talking. Near the piano, a group of executives had gathered, including Jonathan Caldwell himself. One of the younger analysts had just attempted to play a short tune, but the result was less than impressive. A few awkward notes echoed through the room before he laughed and stood up. Jonathan chuckled, swirling the drink in his glass. "All right," he said with a playful smirk. "Clearly, we don't have any concert pianists working here." The group laughed. Someone joked that they should hire a musician for the next event. Jonathan leaned casually against the piano and raised his eyebrows. "I'll tell you what," he said jokingly. "If anyone in this room can actually sit down and play Chopin properly, I'll marry them." The comment drew laughter across the group. It was clearly meant as a joke. No one took it seriously. But a few feet away, Rebecca had stopped moving. Her hand rested quietly on the handle of her cleaning cart. Chopin? For a moment, something stirred deep inside her memory, her father's voice. The hours spent practicing delicate, emotional pieces. The quiet magic of those melodies. She told herself to ignore it. This wasn't her place. But the thought lingered. Without quite realizing why, Rebecca slowly walked toward the piano. At first, no one noticed. People assumed she was simply cleaning nearby. But then, she pulled out the bench and sat down. The small movement caught someone's attention. A few heads turned. Jonathan noticed, too, his expression amused. "Well, now," he said lightly, "this should be interesting." Rebecca placed her hands gently above the keys. Her heart was beating faster than she expected. For a moment, she considered standing up and walking away. But then she remembered something her father used to say. "Music isn't about impressing people, Becca. It's about telling the truth." So she began to play. The opening notes of Chopin's Nocturne in C-sharp minor floated softly into the room. At first, a few people continued their conversations. Then the melody deepened. Within seconds, the atmosphere shifted. Conversations slowed. Heads turned. The delicate phrasing of the music filled the space, each note controlled with remarkable precision and emotion. Rebecca's fingers moved effortlessly across the keys. Years of quiet practice, hidden from the world, suddenly came alive. The room grew silent. Even the waiters paused. Jonathan Caldwell slowly straightened. The playful smirk had vanished from his face. He stared at the woman sitting at the piano, the janitor he had walked past dozens of times without noticing. And he listened. When the final note faded, the silence lingered for a moment longer, almost as if the room itself needed time to breathe again. Then someone began clapping. Another joined, and suddenly the entire lounge erupted into applause. Rebecca turned slightly, surprised by the reaction. She hadn't expected anyone to listen that closely. Jonathan approached the piano slowly. For once, he seemed genuinely speechless. "You work here?" he asked. Rebecca nodded gently. "I clean the offices in the evenings." Jonathan shook his head, almost laughing at the absurdity of the moment. That was extraordinary. Someone in the crowd joked loudly. "Looks like you might owe her a wedding, Jonathan." The room laughed again. Jonathan raised his hands quickly. All right, he said with a grin. "Let's not rush into that." But then he turned back to Rebecca, his expression thoughtful. "Where did you learn to play like that?" "My father taught me," she said softly. Jonathan studied her for a moment, and something in his expression changed. A week later, Rebecca was called into the company's administrative office. She assumed something had gone wrong. Instead, she found Jonathan Caldwell waiting for her. He had spent several days thinking about what he had witnessed, and he had made a decision. Jonathan offered Rebecca something she never imagined. The company would sponsor her enrollment in a respected music conservatory in Boston. Tuition, books, and living assistance, all covered. Rebecca was stunned. She tried to explain that she couldn't accept something so generous. Jonathan simply shook his head. "Talent like yours shouldn't stay hidden behind office desks and trash bins," he said. 2 years later, Rebecca Lawson stood on the stage of a small concert hall, performing her first professional recital. In the audience sat her former cow, Orker Frank Doyle, wiping tears from his eyes. And a few rows away sat Jonathan Caldwell, quietly applauding the woman he once barely noticed, because sometimes the world overlooks extraordinary people simply because they're standing in the wrong place, wearing the wrong uniform, at the wrong time, at the wrong time. And maybe the real lesson in this story is something worth remembering. You never truly know what someone carries inside them. A dream, a talent, a story waiting to be heard. So the next time you see someone others overlook, take a moment to see them fully, because kindness, respect, and opportunity can change a life in ways we may never fully understand. And if this story reminded you that extraordinary talent can be hiding in the most unexpected places, take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who might need a reminder like this today, and subscribe for more stories about the quiet power of humanity.